Unbreakable, written by Navy SEAL Thom Shea. He shares his experiences at the urging of his wife in case he doesn't return from a mission in the war in Afghanistan. He leaves behind some writings for his children to describe what kind of a man he was. There is quite a bit of soldiering in the book. He shares with his children and the reader the heat they had to endure, the weight they have to carry, going through terrain or buildings where you've never been before, rounding up people so as to keep them out of the way. And he talks about firing a long-range gun, just looking through the sight. You have to estimate the wind, the distance, and squeezing the trigger because they weren't supposed to be wasting bullets either. All of this on very little sleep. The title of the book, Unbreakable, is what it's really about. He shares kind of his philosophy in life, and he writes about 13 lessons, how to pay attention to your internal dialogue so that it doesn't do you in, but to catch it and turn it around. Commentary. My own father was a World War II vet. His father was a World War I vet. I grew up with, in my early years, with the Vietnam War on television every night. And although that was an unresolved war, it was very real. And I don't think a whole lot was hidden from the American public as far as the actual war went. What was murky about Vietnam were the early beginnings of it. And that's when you get into, I guess, the Pentagon Papers that were leaked in '71. My own father, it's true, the World War II generation never talked about it. I saw a few photos of him in his Navy uniform, and that was about it. And then some years later, my mother told me my father did have nightmares from the war, and I always thought he was too tough to have a nightmare. But they just did not talk about their war experiences at all. And so when I read a book like this, I understand, somewhat how hard it was and just the horrors of war that they go through. My father wasn't drafted or anything. He did enlist. Now, there's a blur of war in the 2000s. You have the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, and the war on terror. And after the euphoria of 9/11 wore off, there wasn't all that much in the mainstream news about the war anymore. And so when I read a book like this, I realize it was very real. I read recently in another book that the CIA manages the drone program. And that's actually what I remember most recently about the Middle East. You would hear this occasional drone. And these drones sometimes kill in areas that we're not at war with. So since the CIA is operating it, this kind of explains why people don't have a clear grasp of what's happening in the Middle East. It all is kind of a blur and vague. I think the lines are blurred about who's in charge of what. One thing the soldier did mention in his book is that the SEALs were working with special forces. That tells me that the soldiers are better trained probably than they ever have been before, and war is more efficiently fought too because of that. Very good book. So I hope you take the time to buy the soldier's book and read it.